Amazing. Awesome. All right, so here we go. We're going to talk a little bit about what a supervision curriculum should look like, and I'd love to update that for the 5th edition. So our 5th edition is going to begin in 2022. So I just want to take a peek at somewhat like a rough draft of what we should be working on with a supervisee throughout the first couple of hours. I tried to divide this within like 250-hour units just to give you an understanding. So when we're first starting off to work with a supervisee, I really want to get a good idea of what do they work like as an RBT. So I really kind of believe in the Marriott model of this. So if you've ever stayed at a Marriott hotel, one of the big principles that they have is every manager knows how to do every position on the floor. So as an analyst, you can't be a great analyst if you're not a great therapist. It really is a foundational skill because you can't teach something you're not well at teaching, and you can't possibly do yourself. So obviously with time, sometimes with not having that therapy muscle exercise, we get a little rusty, but that's why every time I have the opportunity to jump in and become a therapist, I like to just do it to also know, did I write enough programs? Am I doing this too much? And I'm not losing the ability to really know how to provide direct therapy. So in part, what that would require is, what does it mean to be a good therapist, right? So I thought about the first 250 hours, like you better know how to actually collect data. You'd be very surprised when you do IOA with people, especially your therapist. You get data all over the place. And on Catalyst, like one of these days, I'll also show you guys how to split. We can split data based on who's collecting it. So it gives us a really good idea. Do those numbers look similar or do they not? Now, sometimes they don't look similar because there's legitimate reasons. Maybe one therapist sees them in the morning in a different setting. Maybe the kid eats Cocoa Puffs and he's like really like hyper, and then like, there's 100 different reasons why there's disparity in that data, but many times it's actually because there's inaccurate data collection going on. So at the very foundation, I want to make sure someone knows how to accurately collect data, knows what are the different types of prompt codes when we're using an electronic formula, or if you're using even paper data, you need to know what a physical prompt versus a gestural prompt is. So have a good understanding of prompts. Understand, like I like to say, the 10 commandments of ABA, we only have 4. What are the 4 commandments? You better know the 4 functions backwards and forward. Because if you don't know the 4 functions of behavior, and you'd be very surprised how many RBTs and how many people do not fluently know the 4 functions of behavior. Again, that is one of the predicates of what all of the foundation of ABA is built on. The rest are also the principles of ABA. So understanding extinction, punishment, and reinforcement. So all of these target issues are really ones of how can I make the most excellent therapist and top of the line therapist that can work with absolutely any client that comes their way. That's really my first driver within the first couple of hours of supervision. Understanding how to capture different opportunities for learning. I try to be really mindful of like providing different opportunities depending on my schedules, especially when I have like a unique thing coming up. COVID was a really unique opportunity for many ways to collect hours. I was like, hey, why don't you jump on a call with me? And we made it work somewhat to get some cool unsupervised and really get an understanding of what does it look like to supervise, maybe not in the direct context of a room, and getting much better at detailing explanations. You have to be very, very fluent with detailing explanations when you are online versus when you're in person, because I love to just come in and model, not necessarily always have to explain, well, why don't you move this a little bit to the left and put your hand like this? But you had to become really fluent at that during the pandemic, which was awesome. But just gathering different opportunities of how to learn. And maybe if you know an assessment's coming up for your client, learning how to ask your supervisor, right? I don't always want to put the responsibility on the supervisor. Sometimes the supervisee should say, hey, I don't really have a lot of a fluent understanding of this section of the task list. Do you have something coming up? Can I work alongside another analyst that you may know? So you can get a good breadth and understanding of how to find different learning opportunities. That should never stop even as you're an analyst, right? Like if I need to shadow, and it's happened before, right? Like I really wanted to work at a very specific clinic and I needed an extra hand to run a very formal FBA that I was running. And I was able to seek out an opportunity. And thankfully I got to work with like very experienced analysts, like 20 years, and set this FBA up. And he even let me borrow his clinic and we were able to use video. It was really, really rad. But just understanding that you're going to use the rest of your career. So you really should have understanding of how do you learn and catch your opportunities to grow. because if you learn to learn and love learning, then hopefully you're going to grow as an analyst and as your career evolves. Making sure that a new supervisee understands the difference between net and DTT teaching. That's a really, really big one. So understanding how there's opportunities that come within the environment and others we have to create to really help practice and get our kiddos to what we have. Again, the principles of behavior, have a really solid understanding of what is reinforcement, what is extinction, and what is punishment. And what are the ethics behind that? So from the beginning, and I think that the new task list really tries to, it separates it out, but it's really trying to interweave. You should have a good idea of professional and ethical behavior from the beginning. Generally, the way things start are the way things end. If you start off being really ethical in terms of the way you do things, hopefully you sustain that the rest of your career, God willing. Also, how to read and follow a behavior plan. This is a kind of a point of contention that a lot of people, from what I've heard, feel like they don't have an understanding of how to write a behavior plan. Well, how do you write a behavior plan when you've never read a few? You actually need to get an understanding of how to read one, follow one, and when do you create one versus not have one, and then get a good fluidity of how to use that. Another big thing within our company right now, we offer safety care training. I think it's going to happen a little later on this year, I want to say. But if you have a client that exhibits continuous aggression, self-injury, or high magnitude disruptive behavior, or any kind of behavior that would endanger themselves or others, it's really good to get that within your repertoire, because part of reading a behavior plan is knowing if you have a crisis management system, which system are you going to adhere to? You don't always need to have a crisis management training in order to have a behavior plan, but it's a good idea to have an understanding, okay, those things exist. Why do they exist? Well, it's to ensure your safety and the safety of others and their and client dignity. How to follow a skill acquisition plan. What does that mean? Can you go on the electronic platform that we have, and can you actually follow the directions that are written on the program and do that in a way fluidly throughout a lot of different clients? I'm going to have a volunteer from our group do the pairing session. I'm going to see who's going to do this to practice their like fluidity and teaching skills. But this is kind of like the all elusive unicorn. Like, people tell you to pair, they don't really teach you how to pair. And then people have this formula for pairing, and not everybody's a little different. Some clients require a long time to pair, some clients little. So I feel like we have to get a really good basis and understanding of how to fluidly pair with a client. How to provide preference assessments. And guys, you'd be surprised at this one. Most adults play really horribly. And I like to have a good laugh and giggle when I see most people trying to pair, because they don't really know how to play. And part of what they try to do is, and I've selfishly done this, but I'm very successful at doing this. I don't like to teach children things I don't want to play, because I'm selfish and I don't want to play things I don't want to play. So a lot of my clients, especially early on in my career, all of them play chess because I love to play chess. But I kind of got really good in the rhythm of how to play and teaching and have restructuring play really early on, because I grew up in a really big family. So for me, that was such a blessing, because I was able to get an understanding of what do boys play like, what do girls play like, and then understanding that learning to play means you first need to jump into the world of that person. So we don't teach a child what we like to play from the beginning. No, you have to learn to play what someone likes to play, and learn to play in an age appropriate way. That also means understanding the difference between what is a 6-year-old play like versus a 2-year-old, and what is a 12-year-old play like that looks different from them. What is a boy and a girl? What do children who have multiple siblings play like? And what does their sharing skills look like in comparison to only children? It does look different depending on kind of what context you're in. Hey, this is a big one. Where do all the programs come from? You need to know that. So getting an understanding of what is a VB map, what is an ABLES, what is Vineland, what is AFLS, et cetera, et cetera. You need to get a good understanding of just reading the tools. When you're an analyst and you pass your test, that is not the time to learn how to use those tools. You should fluidly know how to use those tools by the time you get there, so that when you evaluate a client, you know from what plan and from what curriculum you're pulling from and what assessment tool. This is a big one when it comes to ethics. So what is the role of an RBT, a BCBA, a BCABA? What are they trained to do? What are they not trained to do? And what falls ethically under each category? This is a really huge one for me. When, how, and who do you ask for help? There are things that you can self-fix as an RBT. For example, hey, I'm having some issue on Catalyst. Great, sometimes I have to intervene, but guess what? There's a help feature on your account too. You could just ask them yourself. But hey, I have an interesting client-parent dilemma that I'm dealing with. That's something you definitely need to learn to come to me too, because I'm in charge to really, really navigate those quandaries in specific, as opposed to, hey, some tech and admin stuff, you could just go to tech and admin. I don't have to get involved for that. This is a big one. We're going to have a long-term working relationship, which means I'm going to be your supervisor for probably at least 1.5 to 2 to 3 years. I'd love to know how to best provide feedback for you and how you best receive it. Some people receive it in private, some people better receive it in public, but learning that there's a professional and I would say also a kind way, like, right? There's a kind way you can accept and provide constructive and positive feedback and knowing what that means. So when you provide feedback, how often do you guys know you're supposed to provide positive versus constructive? Do you know the difference? No. So it should be about a 4-to-1 ratio. So if anyone ever here gets into the OBM world, which is so awesome, that stands for Organizational Behavioral Management, which is a branch of ABA, that they really deal with how do you best motivate the workforce and kind of structure systems to get people to be at their most productive and reinforce them. But for your constructive feedback to be landed well, you got to kind of really invest in positive feedback, which means as a supervisor, you have to learn to input more positive versus constructive, and then shaping constructive to really be about the item that you're addressing. I would say as a human being, you also kind of have to learn to measure that not everybody receives that information the same. I tend to be a very direct speaker, so that over the course of my career has sometimes been a favorable thing for some people and an unfavorable thing for other people. And so I've learned to kind of mold myself. I would say it's a skill I'm progressing and I'm trying to work on, but it's not always the easiest because everyone has a different style of providing and giving a feedback. But I think that nonetheless, it can be effective and it can be done in a way that's professional. And this is a big one. I know Florin is working on this right now. You'd be surprised how many people cannot describe what is ABA in technical and non-technical language. And I'm actually going to do this exercise right now just to laugh. What is a BCBA? What is autism? We tend to mainly, I'm not saying everyone within ABA, but we treat mainly within our company clients diagnosed on the spectrum. Can you actually understand and explain what having autism means? Can you do it in a way that's simple, short, technical, and non-technical? Can you tell me what is ABA? How's it different from OT? How's it different from speech? How's it different from CBT? How's it different from psychology? How is it different from psychiatry? You really have to have a good understanding of to know what falls in every category so you know what to treat, and being able to explain that to someone in kindergarten and someone who's a PhD. And when you get fluid at doing that, then you'll be really, for me, you're going to be a master of your craft. So guys, if we don't get through the whole list, it's okay. We have next Monday. But I want to know, in terms of the first bank of hours, what do you guys think within this? So I'm going to put here because it just occurred to me. That should be the focus. Does anyone have any input in terms of stuff you feel like within the first few hours of supervision that we're missing? Number one. Number two, that we should emphasize within that list? Versus not, maybe, I don't know.
I don't know. For me, I know you've done a great job personally in the case we share together, but as far as like the OT and knowing when OT and speech therapy comes in, sides like
I actually
releasing an example of work.
So working across field and coordinating care, you're saying, Florin? So like when does,
yes.
each thing happen and coordination of care. Okay, so then this is like,
Right.
I think I have coordination of care a little further down, but I think that maybe understanding how to coordinate care. Yeah.
I have a question. They just gave me a case, and the first thing parents wanted me to do was get in contact with ABA, and I mean with speech and OT.
Yes.
I already read the report, but I feel like I haven't even met the client yet, like one-to-one. It was just an assessment. Like there's not much to. When do you think it's the right time? Like, should I do first observation with them, or because I don't want to just walk in and be like, hey, you should do this and this. Like it doesn't work out like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you never want to look at coordination of care as you're in a therapy session to teach other people. You can imagine if you're studied and trained within your field of expertise, right? So to become a speech or an OT provider, you're probably looking at people who at least have a master's degree, sometimes a doctorate, and have been in their field of practice probably at least 5 to 10 years. I wouldn't take it very favorably if somebody came to my house and told me what to do. And that's the way I think about it. Like, you don't go to someone else's house and tell them what to do. To build a good working coordination of care relationship is understanding what falls under each role. So I think that that's a good point that you brought up, Florin. And what I would say is at the beginning of taking on a client, my main goal is to understand how can I use my field of expertise? So how can I within ABA, using kind of the training I have, best serve this client to get their skills of deficit and the skills that are most imperative for them up, and then reduce the maladaptive behaviors as much as I can. I agree with you, Joanna, I can't do that within just an assessment. But the way I would initiate coordination of care is first by reading the assessment reports as you've had, and then asking within maybe the next month or so if speech and OT would have any time to talk, or if speech had a specific communication that actually is something you would have to do in the beginning. Does speech have a specific communication protocol that's in place? For example, this actually used to happen a ton, especially a little bit ways back, but I still see it happen a lot. An analyst will come in ready to do VB function communication training, but the client has PECs, but then school uses gestures. And you're like, okay, so what's going on with our communication protocol? And that really should be worked in coordination. I wouldn't say one team leads or another, but speech and ABA should really coordinate that. So if a child's already on a pre-existing PECS protocol, maybe fortifying the protocol and making that the best protocol would be the best kind of first place to launch off from. If the child has no kind of understanding of any communication protocol, then of course we can establish a functional communication protocol, but we would really want to work in conjunction if a child's already had speech therapy to understand where is their communication deficit and levels. So maybe understanding if the child, for example, has apraxia, they've been using, different modeling techniques. They're maybe working on increasing his ability to follow instructions. So getting a good idea of where is this kid at within his communication protocol and how has speech influenced that, so that you can have a coordination of care meeting about that in specific. So I really try to kind of come at it as a learner, and I found that to be much more successful for me versus coming in and being like, hey, you're not making the kids say it, you're reinforcing maladaptive behavior and da-da-da. Over time, if I learn to listen first, then someone is much more apt to receive from me, much more. And I mean, I've had people who are expertise, especially specific to AAC protocols. That isn't something by the way, BCBAs are trained to do. That really has to work in coordination with an expert and a speech pathologist who's trained within specializing in AAC devices. For their training, they're really trained to do more words versus less. And over time, by gaining rapport, I've learned to teach them, and they've learned from me that maybe starting off with less is more successful versus more. Because then we dominate better. And that's just kind of the principle of learning, that we kind of have a better breadth and understanding of. But I don't go to somebody else's house and tell them where to put their pots and pans. That's sort of my thought. With OT, I would say it depends where they're receiving OT. One of the kind of big confusions within the pandemic has been, can you go to OT sessions? Like, who can go because of I don't want to have people in here and spread and this and that. So there's kind of a little bit of a complication with the pandemic. So I'm just going to put an asterisk there. But generally, they're not used to having people come to their sessions. And that's not always a bad thing. So if you at least make the effort to try to coordinate care, to speak on the phone or say, hey, can I observe via telehealth or whatever, so I can understand with the parent, what is it that you're doing? What are the child's physical or fine motor limitations? What are some techniques or strategies I can implement? One of the greatest things I've learned from OT is basically you have to start off at the foundation and every single step is necessary. If you don't build the steps that are necessary, you can't get to step B. I'll give you an example. Children who don't do tummy time generally don't tend to crawl, stand, and walk very well. They will do those steps, but they don't do them the same because they never gave their body the opportunity to build up the skill of getting a strong core, then learning to roll over, then learning to crawl, then learning to walk. Or children, for example, who just go from rolling over, crawl very little, and then just walk, they actually end up affecting a lot of their fine motor over the long haul because they never put pressure on their hands. So then almost always children who don't crawl have really crappy handwriting. So it's really, really important to meet those goals and needs in order. And kids who have poor gross motor strength don't tend to have good fine motor strength. And we can't work on fine motor until we work on gross motor. So understanding that everything comes in an order has been a really life-changing lesson that I've gotten from OTs who I've learned from, right? So understanding like, no, I do not know everything about the human body and I don't know what muscle goes where and how things stretch or whatever. So understanding there's a lot for me to learn before I go around. You'd be surprised if they're like, oh, you're the behavior expert. Questions kind of come like really, really easy after that. Once you build rapport with them, they'll be like, yeah, so how can I get this kid to sit down? I'll be like, oh, sure, I can do that. Like, no worries. So that's a really good one. So understanding how to coordinate care and maybe when. So I'll put that in, how and when to coordinate care. So Lauren, since this is your exercise.
Okay.
What is a BCBA?
Okay, a BCBA stands for Board Certified Behavior Analyst. So our role involves organizing behavior plans individualized based on whatever our client's needs are. So whether it's social deficits, communication deficits, it's individualized to that client. So we'll look at their needs and come up with a behavior plan or intervention plan to address those.
Awesome, love it. What's the difference between that and the therapist or an RBT?
Oh, okay. RBT, a registered behavior technician, our role is to follow the plans that the BCBA creates. So we can follow those treatment plans. There are certain things that we can implement as well, but we're not the ones that'll be creating new procedures. We're not implementing new punishment procedures or new reinforcement procedures that hasn't been already authorized by the BCBA. So our role is just to implement those daily, day-to-day programs and interventions that we have in our behavior plan created by the BCBA.
Perfect. You did a really great kind of summarized version of what each role is. Even simpler, you can say the BCBA leads the team, the RBT follows.
Okay.
Right?
That's better.
You know, because you gave a very thorough, detailed explanation. What we have a hard time doing and takes experiences, condense it so that a family can really understand. Oh, okay, I understand that. What you're saying makes a lot of sense, but it depends kind of the situation of where the parent is to process at that time. So
okay.
Even you'll see sometimes a lot of my families will say the supervisor because they don't even know what the heck a BCBA. No, they know like super. That makes more sense to them. Like, oh, the supervisor and the therapist, and you know, not to get, you know, not love everyone's credentials because they don't know how long it takes to get those 4 letters after your name, and you're like, dude, I'm a BCBA. But if you kind of help explain it that way, that's exactly what you just said. So I think you did a really good job summarizing that. Leslie, what is autism?
Autism, which definition do you want? The clinical or the layman's term?
I want both.
Okay. Autism is a developmental disability that affects the social, communication, and behavioral skills in a child. Basically, what that means is a child with autism plays, understands, and communicates differently than any other normal, regular child.
Does that mean my kid can't learn?
No, absolutely not. They learn in a different way.
Bingo. Beautifully done. There you go. And
Well,
so,
a year ago, you asked me that, and I was like,
yes, and I made you memorize the definition because you're gonna get asked 100 times. You will
That's
get
where
this
I am.
question asked 100,000 times. I promise you. Who else is here? Miss Jess, which one do you want to do? I'll leave the big bomb for me. Don't worry. I'll choose whatever question no one else wants. So I'll look for you.
Which one, like the difference between like ABA and OT?
Yeah. Can you explain to me the difference between speech, ABA, and OT?
So basically, speech therapy is for children that have articulation and language deficits.
Mhm.
And they're able to work, let's say if they have like anything like swallowing disorders, if they need some type of augmentation device. Is that what it's called?
Mhm.
Yeah. And then OT basically works on all what's fine motor skills, such as writing, being able to work on skills like such as like dressing, like zipping, tying, what else?
Sensory regulation.
Yeah, sensory regulation.
Regulation, and then also coordination of the body.
Yeah.
It's actually a really big deficit a lot of our kids.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are the different, and ABA is, I mean, we're working on like skill acquisitions based on assessments and working on reducing behaviors compared to the others.
So do you do the same thing that speech and OT does?
No.
Okay.
No.
But then how come you guys spend more time than speech and OT? Why do you need more of that?
Why? I don't know. I would think that you would need more ABA, well, depending on the individual, since it all is individualized, that individual may have the need for more support in areas, you know, in communication, social skills, then in areas such as like OT, where it could be like more specific, or than speech.
Okay, this is where it is a really good opportunity to use the word holistic, right? Holistic, evidence-based. So even just saying like ABA is an evidence-based treatment that encapsulates the child's well-being. So our purpose within ABA is to make sure that there's socially significant changes in a child's life. In English, that means the goal is to make sure that your kiddo is happy and independent. I mean, that's really my goal in life, is like, how can I help them live the best life they can live and be as independent as they can? So that means that I take more of an evidence-based and a holistic approach to learning. So we can teach people how to best learn to do life skills, as well as communication skills, as well as social skills. So it takes us a lot more time to do that, generally, especially when they're younger, than it would to have effective and evidence. By the way, speech and OT are evidence-based treatments. So don't say that they're not evidence-based, right? That's not true. But it takes more time to have an effective behavior ABA plan versus speech and OT.
I have a question.
True.
Is it safe to say that ABA like encompasses OT and speech therapy as well, because it allows like the specifics of those programs to be, I guess, like utilized?
I would
like
say I would reframe what you said in terms of saying we encapsulate speech and OT strategies,
right?
And try to help a child practice the given plan,
right,
within those individual fields.
Right.
The other big indicator for me that's easy for people to remember for speech is, I always say, from here in is speech, from here out is me. So anything has to do with like swallowing, doing, that's why even when we do a feeding protocol, for example, we need to have a speech pathologist do a swallow study.
Mhm.
I already have a kid who can't swallow correctly. So if I start saying, oh yeah, I know he can feed it, everything's sensory, everything's behavioral, and then I don't really assess for the swallowing function, and the kid chokes on my watch, guess what? It's my fault.
Mhm.
It is, because I try to go above and beyond the scopes of understanding of my skill set, which isn't here in, it's here out.
Right. Okay.
And that's kind of interesting, because I actually had to correct an OT provider for that. They're like, no, we can do feeding. I'm like, I think what you guys work on is desensitization, but not necessarily ingestion of food. Now, maybe you're an OT and a speech pathology. I don't know. That could happen. I don't know. People, no, actually, when I was training up, two of my supervisors were both speech pathologists and BCBAs. So maybe you have two competencies. I don't know. But from my understanding, the people who work from here in is speech, not out, right? So that's really important to know. I think that's really good. Do you guys feel like we're missing anything, or we have to help fortify some of this stuff? No? All right. This might take a few less sessions. I didn't even realize. Oh, we're getting up on time. Very close. Let me see if I can make it through just about 500 hours here. So when you kind of start, I really would hope that this is like a scaffolding skill that you guys learned, and dominate really well the first few points within the first 250, and then move on to the next 250. So when we hopefully dominate everything in the first section, and the next section is, I want to start giving a basis and an understanding of what is it that a supervisor does, a BCBA does, or a BCABA will do. So learning how to read, maybe not just making inferences, maybe learning, hypothetically, you should learn this in class, but sometimes people don't. Learning to find, read, and make inferences from empirical articles, right? So understanding where JABA is, how you can access medical journals from your, well, for example, my university allows me free access the rest of my life to like medical journals. I just have to log on through my university email. Other people have it for like through an association. So if you're an APBA member, you can also research articles there. Learning how to read and find the appropriate articles, and how to make inferences from certain single study cases or from like double blind studies. So it just depends what you need. Learning what is a cost to benefit ratio. So every single thing in life is cost to benefit. Even people are like, oh, I want to put my kid in ABA. Well, there's a cost and benefit to that. Are you willing to commit to like the plan we're doing, the costs involved in that? And is that benefit better than not implementing care at all? So understanding when you have to make those judgment calls, or like, hey, I really want to put my kid in school. I think, Joanna, you're sort of going through that. Like, I want to put my kid in school. I want to transition. Well, what does that mean? Which school? How? Where? How long? What does that mean in terms of your therapy schedule? Because you only have 24 hours in a day like everyone else. So how to really implement a cost benefit analysis and ratio. Let me put analysis. That'd probably be better. Okay. What are the ethics of punishment and extinction? Sometimes it's not really doable to do extinction. I know Maria went through this with a client. Like, she actually had to suspend an extinction procedure because the family wasn't willing to implement it at home. So we can't just place an extinction procedure in one place and then have it reinforce another. It just doesn't really work out. Identifying functions. So learning how to do it fluidly. So seeing a situation and saying, okay, I think that the hypothesized function is A. I think that the hypothesized function is B. Maybe observing a few FBAs so you can actually see what a function looks like, and then learn the awesome, crazy nature of multifunctional behaviors. Those are just the best and the most difficult to kind of tease out. Have fluency in what error correction is, errorless teaching, different types of teaching models, and which style works better with each client. So maybe if I need to do mass trialing, DTT works better for this client at this moment, and net learning works better in this guy. And learning how the very basics of programming, very basic. So, okay, I identified a curriculum I want to work with. Okay, where does it go? How do I open it on this electronic platform? How do I write it in order? Why does it take me an hour to write one program? Well, it takes everyone an hour the first time they're writing a program. And then how come other people can do it in 10 minutes? Well, because they've probably done a lot more than you have. So learning how to program, how to best specify and write what you mean and what you want the therapist to say. Because what happens a lot, and this is a really common mistake, is we sometimes write programs understanding with our knowledge of ABA, and when an RBT, especially a new RBT is running it, they have no idea what the heck we mean. So being very clear about what you mean for people to understand and say, and understand that sometimes people will run the wrong program because you write it incorrectly. And being very like humble about that. Like, yeah, sometimes I write a program that's not clear. So let me be as clear as possible so I can write a really complete program. So any opinions on what else should we learn about a third of the way there? No? So, I mean, you're a third of the way there. I feel like you're on your way to a good analyst. So I feel like that's where we're at. So I'm going to pause right here and then we'll pick up from here next Monday. Hopefully finish up the rest of the training. Does anyone have any questions before I wrap up?
Is this list based on the new hours for?
So that's really interesting. I'm trying to redefine and edit the list to encompass a 2,000 hour schedule. After the first 500, I'm going to move in 500-hour blocks. So next 500, the next 500, the next 500, the next 500. So I do want to do it more like a collaborative panel to have people really chime in and say, hey, you're missing this off. Obviously, the task list is the specific direct training manual that every single analyst should have. This is more as a cheat sheet of, hey, what should I know within this time frame? And what should I be teaching during this time frame? Of course,
So-
modeled after the task.
Yeah, basically, lastly, what you're trying to refer as a task list is like more theory, and here is more practice. So it's
Correct.
that's what I'm referring to.
Yep. Awesome. So I will stop the recording. Oh, poor Tiana, I don't know how she got kicked out. Tiana, what happened to the beach? You got kicked out. Also, that's the other thing too. I want to make sure, does that kind of make sense for everybody? Where we started like, hey, I got to make a good foundational therapist and then I'll be able to build a better analyst. Awesome. Cool.